Reading this morning is from the Gospel of Luke. What was in Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, becomes the Sermon on the Plain in Luke, but pretty much the same content. Luke 12. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten in God's sight. But even the hairs of your head are all counted. Do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. And later in that same chapter, he said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? Does everything happen for a reason? No. Next question. Do some things happen for a reason? Yes. Is reason a good thing? Yes. Our ability to reason is a necessary but not sufficient tool in the search for truth. Let me explain. I'm in many ways a sentimental fool. And sentimental people are the people that are most likely to find that everything happens for a reason. My mother died in 2009, but if she had lived, today would have been her 96th birthday. She is part of my own personal great chain of being. If she had not existed, I would not be here today. I have a picture of my mother and father at a house party in 1939, the weekend that they met. My father is leaning against a car between 2 beautiful women. One is my mother, and the other is her best friend, Harriet. Had my father fallen for Harriet, I would not be here today. But that is not the reason he fell in love with my mother. I don't believe there was a genie who whispered in his ear, take the one on the right. And if you do, 76 years from now, your third son will stand up and preach a dandy sermon about the picture your friend is taking right now. My very existence is a consequence of the fact that he went for one Roman instead of the other, but it's not the reason. The cause has to precede the consequence. The saying everything happens for a reason often implies some sort of moral judgment, the kinds of rewards and punishments I was talking about last week as the Santa game. For example, last August, televangelist Pat Robertson gave his opinion that a dip in the stock market back then was a result of God's displeasure with the Obama administration's defense of abortion rights and Planned Parenthood. For people of Pat's theology, the reasons things happen usually have to do with God, and if the things happening are bad, it must be because God is angry, and God happens to get angry about the same sort of things Pat Robertson gets angry about. In 2010, he asserted that the earthquake which struck Haiti was a result of the fact that Haiti had made a pact with the devil in order to get their independence in 1791. And this kind of reasoning is well grounded in the Hebrew Bible, where almost everything that happens, good or bad, is a result of God's pleasure or displeasure. But for most of us, a dip in the stock market or a hurricane in Haiti is a random occurrence without moral implications at all. And originally the saying everything happens for a reason was not moralistic, but metaphysical, a statement about how the world works in terms of general cause and effect. It amazed me in looking into this that we can come close to saying who was the first person to use this phrase. In the 5th century BCE, before Socrates and Plato, lived two philosophers named Democritus and Leucippus. Leucippus was said to be the master and Democritus the pupil. And we know a lot more about Democritus. In fact, there's some doubt as to whether Leucippus ever lived at all. However, one saying attributed to Leucippus survives. Let's see if my Greek will serve me. Uten chroma maten genetai, alapanta e logu te kai anarches. Nothing happens at random, matin, but everything for a reason, logos, and by necessity. Nothing occurs at random, but everything for a reason and by necessity. The important thing in this quote from Leucippus is not that he was possibly the first guy who said everything happens for a reason, but that the word he uses for reason is logos. You see, this word logos has three English translations: word, reason, and plan. As the philosophers used it, it was more reason and plan. What really ran the world, what really called the shots, was not the will of the gods, but a set of impersonal laws. Democritus and Leucippus were the first determinists. Everything that happens is caused by something else that happens. Democritus wanted to wrest control of man's fate from arbitrary gods and make us more responsible for our actions. Determinism gives us a billiard ball universe. If you know the initial position of the balls and how the cue ball enters that array, it will interact according to a set of rules which enable us to predict which balls will hit which and how each will end up. Logos, the reason or plan, governs. But there are two exceptions. One is human free will, and the other is randomness. Free will is the basis of moral responsibility. We only punish a person who does wrong if he or she had the choice to do right. Philosophically, however, in ancient times and modern, there are strong arguments that humans do not actually have free will, but the choices we think we are making freely are just as determined by who we are and our history as anything else in the universe. But I've touched on this many times before. What I want to concentrate on this morning is the other escape from determinism, randomness. Leucippus said nothing happens randomly, but Leucippus lived long before we understand how random reality is. Before the philosophers came on the scene, the ancient Greeks, like a lot of ancient peoples, thought that everything that happened was caused by the gods. The gods were notoriously irrational and had their own issues, so no one expected the world to be run by any kind of plan. Instead, most things that happened were a result of fate. Fate is a strong force in classical Greek tragedy and in the epics of Homer. The concept of fate is also strong in early Anglo-Saxon thought, where it is called weird, W-Y-R-D, weird. Anglo-Saxons said every man has his weird, which he could do nothing to escape. The word is the root of our modern word, weird, W-E-I-R-D. The three witches at the beginning of Macbeth are the weird sisters, setting forth the destiny of the characters in the tragedy about to unfold. Logos, an impersonal reason or plan, was a philosophical innovation and improvement on this early idea of fate. Plato held that reason or logos was the most important attribute of God, and individuals could get a glimpse of it because each of us had the seed of reason, spermatikos logos, in our own minds. Platonism is thoroughly imbued in the mystical prologue of St. John's Gospel, which reads, "In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God." The conventional English translation of Logos in this famous passage is word, but I think the author was also referring to the full Platonic concept of plan or reason as well as word. Logos as the plan of life is different from fate. Fate is a roll of the dice that has occurred long before, rather like predestination in Calvinism. You can't escape it, you can't know it, you can't understand it. Logos, at least in principle, is knowable. Logos is the reason for which everything happens. And the Christian tradition is that God knows it all. Jesus says that God knows the fall of every sparrow, as well as the numberless hairs on your head. Now that is a nice poetic thing for Jesus to say, but it is pretty challenging to think about. Just in the last decade, we have cameras and recording devices that keep track of a lot of visual reality, and already we are running out of storage space. If God keeps track of not only all that is happening now, but all that has ever happened everywhere in the 15 billion years the universe has been in existence, and all that will happen until the universe runs down, where does God store this information? Is there a galaxy somewhere devoted to server farms? You see, the religious and philosophical ideas of the ancients, these ideas about who's minding the store, who's making things happen, had to change once science gave us new insights. The idea that God knows everything had to break down with the atom. The Greeks had postulated that there was a unit of matter which was so small that it was indivisible. With the advent of modern science, this ancient idea of atoms got revived and turned out to be true. In 1827, a botanist named Robert Brown was looking through a microscope at particles inside of cavities within pollen grains in water. He could see these particles in motion, but was not able to detect what was making them move. The particles were the tiniest things he could see, but he theorized that things even tinier were impacting on these particles and making them move, what came to be called Brownian motion. Subsequent physics showed that indeed molecules in a gas or liquid will exhibit random motion and impact on large particles in unpredictable ways, and molecules are made up of atoms. So our billiard table just got many incredibly tiny balls. You could not even in theory show how they were going to move, for the motion is purely random. Leucippus claimed that there's no such thing as randomness. Science shows us that randomness is all there is at the lowest end of the scale. And what scientists developed to describe this was a theory not of where each particle is, but the probabilities that any given particle was anywhere. The name of this field became statistical mechanics, a way to mathematically describe processes that did not have a logos, did not have a reason or plan. Or maybe it's more accurate to say that randomness was their logos. And now we have quantum mechanics, a level below atoms, which is weirder still and more random. In short, science has shown us that randomness is a very important part of the makeup of reality in a way that Leucippus, back in the 5th century BCE, could not have seen. Randomness is rampant in biology, where it is a factor both in genetics and in evolution. Both of these systems have deterministic rules by which they operate, but both have a strong element of chance as well. What we've seen since the rise of modern science is a breakdown in the old billiard ball logos, the old system by which the world is a function of a plan in the mind of God. This breakdown paved the way in the 20th century for this philosophical school we call existentialism. Existentialism takes for granted that neither life nor the world has any inherent meaning, and it is up to us to make meaning of it. Life is inherently absurd for Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Camus, Sartre, Beckett. Our own Gene Pickett, former president of the UUA, described in his sermon a couple months ago how he felt a kinship with the existentialist hero Sisyphus, perpetually rolling the stone up the hill only to have it roll back again. If you've ever followed the ins and outs of the UUA at the national level, you will understand what Gene was talking about. In an existentialist world, whatever reasons there are for things happening are reasons we bring to the world, not reasons which are inherently there. We live and die in randomness. And we live despite overwhelming odds against our getting here at all. It's tricky to apply this frame of reference to real situations. In the middle of our holiday struggle with our colds, Jacqueline and I watched a captivating French film named Amélie. It is a story of how many of you seen it? Oh, remembered, okay. It's a story of a most unusual Parisian woman, and the film starts with her childhood. Amélie is a child who does not play with other children, and is totally under the thumb of her domineering and pious mother. One day when Amélie is a teenager, her mother takes her to the Cathedral of Notre Dame. And the mother is standing outside the front entrance of that famous building, beckoning for Amélie to come over where she is. At that moment, on the top of the tower, a tourist from Quebec decides to commit suicide by jumping off the building, and she lands straight on Amélie's mother, killing her. This freakiest of freak accidents seems as good an event as any to examine this phrase, everything happens for a reason. Suicide is rare, and a suicide turning to homicide has got to be rarer still. No one could have predicted. We can all agree that it is possible to have happened, but wildly improbable. Now, on one level, the statement is true that even this wildly improbable event happened for a reason. For if we examine anything that happens, we can find some kind of cause, if only what happened the moment before. We can say that the death of Amélie's mother was caused by the decision of the tourist to throw herself off the cathedral at that moment. Technically, it's a cause, but it really doesn't satisfy us as a reason that this happened. When we say things happen for a reason, what we usually mean is that what happened in this instance was part of some larger pattern. If we want to be hopeful, we might say that this freak accident led to some good outcome for the heroine. We take this event as a data point and look to other dots to connect to try to make a picture. In the film, the relationship of Amélie and her mother has nothing to do with this tourist from Quebec before her suicide. It is literally something that happened out of the blue. Or to put it another way, it is a random occurrence. Does this mean that I've just disproved the statement that everything that happens for a reason? No, for two reasons. First, the fall did not actually happen. This is a work of fiction, and the event was all in the scriptwriter's mind. Second, within the story, there certainly is a reason for the mother to die. It allows Amélie to become her own self, and though she is painfully introverted, she discovers that her mission in life is to make other people happy in a lot of innovative ways. The storyteller knows that everything has to happen for a reason in the story. The existentialists produce stories true to the nature of reality, that is, meaningless stories, like Waiting for Godot, stories of the absurd. But nobody reads them today. We want stories where good triumphs over evil, even if we have to off the principal character's mother by a bolt from the blue, by a deus ex machina. Some of us will still think everything happens for a reason, and indeed many things do happen for a reason. Some who believe in God will say that almost everything that happens is due to God's will, like Pat Robertson. But even those who don't believe in God will often believe in giant conspiracies. Some people believe that Bill Clinton put Donald Trump up to running for president. In the last presidential campaign, there was a feeling that the Koch brothers were pulling all the strings. And perhaps some of these grand conspiracy theories have a grain of truth in them. Take what happened to me just last Sunday afternoon. I was just mulling this sermon topic over when I picked up the New York Times book review and casually flipped open a page, and my eye fell upon the words, "The conspiratorial brain. We are hardwired to believe that nothing happens by accident." Was this a mere coincidence? Or was there some guiding fate? It couldn't be a buried memory, because before I sat down, I had never opened that particular issue of the book review. The article turned out to be a review of a book by a psychologist, Rob Brotherton, called Suspicious Minds, Why We Believe in Conspiracy Theories. The thesis of the book is belief in conspiracy, reading intention into the pattern of what happens in the world, is not restricted to nut jobs on the fringe. We all do it because we're hardwired to do it. A couple of quotes from the review. Quote, "For example, psychologists have discovered that we possess an intentionality bias, which tricks us into assuming every incidental event that happens in the world is a result of someone's intention. A proportionality bias convinces us that momentous events must have equally momentous causes, which is why some people vainly shake a die harder when they want to roll a large number, as if it were a fairground strength tester. We're all predisposed predisposed to see patterns in coincidental events. And my favorite sentence from the review, paradoxically, the illusion of an evil, all-powerful conspiracy guiding events can be more comforting than the reality that humans are rarely in control. Unquote. I'm not saying that the search for meaning in events is bad. What's bad is the compulsion to find meaning and our blindness to the role that randomness or pure chance plays. Where I think this impacts us most recently, and this just came to me 10 minutes before I was going to preach this sermon, because I've been mulling over Black Lives Matter and the question of how people string together the various dots of, say, police misconduct, police killings of blacks. Some people see a major pattern of racism, and some people see them as discrete entities. And the question is, what is the meaning that you put on it in your mind? And that has a lot to do with your own assumptions about the world and your own social history, your own social location. But I get back to my mother and father to close. I'm glad that my mother and father got together and that I came into existence as a consequence. But my existence was not a cause of them getting together. I don't think it was prefigured in any way except in my general genetic inheritance. It is not true that everything that happens, for everything that happens, there is a reason. For some things there are reasons, but randomness, chance, coincidence play an important role. But it is true that, as Ecclesiastes and Pete Seeger tell us, for everything there is a season. Frank will now sing about that as we turn to the morning offering. Amen.